I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee, scrolling through my phone, when my stepfather, Greg, walked in. He wasn't the type to show up at the kitchen table at this hour. Normally, Greg spent his Sundays sprawled out in front of the TV, barking about politics or making half-hearted attempts at fixing something around the house. But that day, the way he walked in, with his eyes tight, his face drawn and serious, I knew something was off. At first, I thought he might need help with something, but when he spoke, it was like a switch had flipped in him. "You need to start paying rent," he said flatly, his gaze fixed on the countertop in front of him like he was trying to avoid looking me in the eye. I stared at him for a second, not sure if I had heard him right. "What?" I muttered, setting my cup down on the table. My heart started to beat a little faster. Greg wasn't exactly the type of person to beat around the bush, but this came out of nowhere. "Rent," he repeated, turning his eyes towards me at last. "This house isn't free. You're 22 now. You can't live here for nothing." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. A sharp sting of disbelief hit my chest. "What are you talking about? This house is mine. You know that." Greg gave me a look, one that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger exactly, more like something colder, distant, like he was seeing me as a problem, not a stepdaughter anymore. "You don't get it. I've been covering everything around here since your mom died. Utilities, groceries, bills. I don't owe you anything. You're not a kid anymore." His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was an edge to it that made my skin crawl. I opened my mouth, not sure if I was going to shout or just walk out, but before I could say anything, he continued, "I'm not asking for much. A couple $100 a month, just to cover your share. It's time you start contributing." I felt a sharpness in my throat. The way you feel before you burst into tears but refuse to let it happen. "You want me to pay rent here? In my own house?" Greg's gaze hardened, his lips pressing together in a thin line. "Yeah, Ido. I've been holding things together around here for years, and I'm not going to keep doing it for free. You're old enough now. Time to grow up." His words were calculated, like he had been rehearsing this moment for weeks, waiting for the right time to drop it on me. For a second, I just sat there, staring at him. There was a sick feeling spreading in my gut. Something didn't add up. I wanted to lash out, to tell him everything. How the house was in my name, how my mom had left it to me in a trust when she passed away, how he didn't even know the full story. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to understand what was going on first. I needed to figure out if this was just about money, or if there was something deeper, something darker happening between us. Finally, I found my voice. "You can't be serious. You've always been the one to talk about how much you've done for this family, but this is my house, Greg. I don't owe you anything." He stared at me for a long moment, like he was sizing me up, figuring out whether I was bluffing or not. When he spoke again, his voice was colder, more deliberate. "You think that just because your name is on some paper, you can get away with living here without contributing? I've been carrying this family, making sure we don't end up on the street. You want to play the I'm the owner card? Fine, but you'll pay your way, just like anyone else would. No free rides." I felt my chest tighten, the familiar anger rising. He didn't know. He didn't know that I was the one who owned this house. He didn't know that the deed had been signed over to me when I was just 18, locked in a trust fund that only I could access. I had never told him about it. My mom's decision, and one I never felt the need to explain. But now, as he stood there, acting like he was doing me some kind of favor, I felt the overwhelming urge to tell him the truth, to let him know how wrong he was. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Fear that if I told him now, the balance of power would shift in a way I wasn't ready for. Or maybe it was pride. Pride that I didn't want him to see me as someone who needed to be taken care of. "So, what? You think just because you've been here longer, you have some sort of claim over this place?" I asked, my voice rising, though I tried to keep it steady. Greg shrugged, a nonchalant motion that made my blood boil. "It's not about claim, it's about responsibility. I'm not going to let you live here like some freeloading kid. Not anymore." My mind raced, spinning through the years of tension between us, the way he always seemed to want to control things, control the household, control me. I could feel the frustration building up in me, but I didn't know how to channel it. Not yet. Not when I was still trying to piece together why this was happening now. "Well, I said slowly, my hands tightening into fists on the table. I'll think about it. But don't expect me to just roll over and hand you money. That's not how this works. Greg didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there stunned. The silence that followed felt suffocating, the weight of his words still hanging in the air like smoke. As I sat there, my mind was spinning. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something wasn't right. This wasn't just about money. It never had been. Greg had always been a problem, but this felt like a declaration of war. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't just going to let him get away with it. Not this time. The days that followed Greg's demand were strange, tense. It was like the air in the house had thickened overnight. Every time I walked past him, or he walked past me, there was this unspoken energy between us, like we were both bracing for something we didn't fully understand yet. I kept my mouth shut for a while, unsure of how to approach the situation. I mean, I couldn't just blurt out that I owned the house, could I? It felt like it would be too much, like a betrayal of some unspoken rule. So I let the silence linger, hoping it would dissipate, that maybe he would forget about it or back down. But he didn't. Every day he brought it up again, and each time it was a little more forceful, a little more insistent. The first time he mentioned it again, I was just coming in from the grocery store, bags in hand, and I barely had time to step through the door before he started in. "You need to start paying," Greg said from the living room, his voice sharp, almost like a demand. "I'm not kidding. I need that money. You can't live here for free anymore. You know that." "Greg, I'm not paying rent," I said, setting the bags down with more force than I intended. "This is my house. You can't just take that from me." He didn't even look at me when he spoke, just stared at the TV like he was watching some game show, his hands curled around his beer can. "I don't care about your name on a piece of paper. I've been paying for everything in this house for years. You want to live here? You pay up." My chest tightened at the words, but I couldn't let him see how much they stung. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the house. It was about power, and Greg was trying to take it from me. I had to remind myself that I had the upper hand, that he didn't know about the trust, about the deed. But even that wasn't enough to shake the feeling that this wasn't just a fight about money. It felt personal, like he was trying to make a point, trying to break me down slowly, to make me feel small, to show me who was really in control. The tension in the house only grew worse with each passing day. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus on anything but Greg's constant presence, his demands, the way he acted like everything was normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. When I tried to talk to my mom about it, well, I couldn't. She was gone, and I couldn't talk to my friends. They didn't know what it was like living with Greg. They didn't know what he was like when he let that mask slip, when the cracks in his facade started to show. I knew it was time to confront him, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing if you were going to fall or if you'd find your footing and climb back up. But I had to, because this wasn't going away, and I couldn't let him control me like this. Not anymore. One evening, after dinner, Greg was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through some old bills, probably pretending to budget, but I saw through it. I saw the way his eyes kept flicking to me, how he waited for me to react, to show some sign of weakness. I couldn't do it anymore. I was done being quiet. "Greg," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "This isn't your house. This is mine. You don't get to tell me what I have to pay for." His head snapped up, his eyes flashing with irritation. "Oh, so now you're going to play the I own the house card? This isn't some little game, you know. You're not a kid anymore, and you're sure as hell not going to live off me like some charity case. You want to live here? You pay your share. Simple as that." His voice was harder now, like he had finally had enough of me questioning him. "No," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I don't have to pay anything. You don't get to do this. You don't get to come into my life and try to control everything. You're not my father, Greg. You're not even my real family. I don't owe you a damn thing." The words hung in the air, thick with something darker than just anger. I could see his face shift, a quick flash of something. Was it surprise? Guilt? For a moment, he looked almost human. But then it was gone, replaced by that cold mask again, the one he wore like armor, hiding whatever was behind it. "You better watch your tone," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You don't talk to me like that. I put up with you and your attitude for years, and I'm done. You think because you've got some paper that says you own this house that you can run around and do whatever you want? No, you don't get to act like you're in control here. I'm in charge, and you're going to pay, or you can leave. I felt a surge of anger rush through me, hot and overwhelming. The way he spoke, like I was some kind of problem he had to fix, like I was the one out of line. I didn't say anything at first, though. I couldn't. I had to think. I had to figure out how to handle this, how to make him understand that I wasn't going to let him walk all over me. But in that moment, something shifted. I realized I couldn't win by playing by his rules. If I kept playing his game, he would win. But I had a trump card, something he didn't know. The trust fund. The deed. It was mine, and it was time to use it. I don't need to pay you anything, Greg, I said finally, my voice calmer now, colder. You don't control this house, and I'm not leaving. So you can either get on board with that, or you can get out. For a moment, Greg just stared at me, his mouth tight, his hands clenching around the edges of the table. I could see the fury building in his eyes, the way his fingers twitched like he wanted to lash out, to hit something. But he didn't. Instead, he stood up, his chair scraping across the floor, and walked out without another word. As the door slammed behind him, I sat there, trying to catch my breath. My heart was racing, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. This wasn't over. I knew that. The war had just begun, and I wasn't going to back down. But for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I had the power to take this back. To take my life back. And Greg? He had no idea what was coming. The days after my confrontation with Greg felt like a weird limbo. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, but neither of us had said anything about it. He was still acting like he owned the place, walking around as if everything was normal, but I knew better. He knew better too, but I wasn't sure if he understood the full weight of what I was saying. I was playing the long game now. I had to, because this wasn't just about money or rent anymore. This was about power, control, and taking back what I had lost. For the first time in weeks, I took a real moment to think, to reflect on the house, the deed, and the trust my mom had set up for me. I had avoided thinking about it for so long, not because I didn't trust it, but because it was easier to ignore. The trust had been a way for my mom to ensure I had something that couldn't be taken from me, even after she was gone. She had set it up without telling Greg, and I always assumed it would stay that way. Greg never asked about the specifics of the trust, always too focused on whatever else he had going on in his life. It was always about money with him, and he had no idea I could hold my ground here. But then I realized something. If he knew nothing about the trust, if he didn't even know I had control of the house, he wouldn't stop pushing until I gave in. That's when I decided to take a step I hadn't planned on, talking to someone who might be able to help me out of this mess. I reached out to Laura, a lawyer I had known since I was a kid. She had always been close to my mom and had helped me with a few things after my mom passed. I had never thought of asking her about the house or the trust, but now I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The evening I called her, I wasn't sure what I expected, but her response was immediate, calm, and to the point. Of course, we can meet. Come by the office tomorrow morning, and we'll go through everything. That was it. No judgment, no questions, just business. I spent the entire night tossing and turning, going over the details of the trust in my mind, hoping I hadn't missed anything that could give Greg an upper hand. But the next morning, I was determined. I had to go in, lay everything out, and figure out what my next move should be. This wasn't just about Greg anymore. It was about taking back my life and putting an end to whatever power struggle he thought he could create. When I arrived at Laura's office, she greeted me warmly, as she always did, but there was something about her that made me feel safe, like she wasn't going to judge me, no matter how messy the situation was. She sat me down in her office, handed me a cup of coffee, and didn't waste any time getting to the point. "So, what's going on?" she asked, settling into her chair. "You mentioned needing to go over some family business. How can I help?" I took a deep breath and began to explain everything. Greg's demands, his insistence that I pay rent, and how I had avoided bringing up the trust up until now. As I spoke, I could see Laura listening intently, her expression not giving anything away, but I knew she was processing everything. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, she opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, the kind that made my stomach twist with dread. She slid it across the table to me, and I hesitated before I opened it. Inside were documents, legal documents, ones I'd seen before, but this time, they were all for me. The trust, the deed, the will, and all the fine print that I hadn't really paid attention to before. "You've got a solid case here," she said quietly, leaning back in her chair. "Your mother set up this trust for you with very specific intentions. Greg doesn't have any claim to this house, and if you want to keep him out of it, you're fully within your rights." I wasn't sure if I was relieved or even more anxious at this point. This was good news, right? But what did it mean? What was the catch? "I don't get it," I said, shaking my head. "He doesn't know about the trust, right? But what if he finds out? What if he tries to take this to court? I don't know if I can handle all of that. Laura, I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight him." She smiled, a reassuring, almost motherly look that made me feel a little less scared. "You're stronger than you think. And Greg doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. But we can take some steps to make sure he doesn't find out about this. At least not until you're ready. And in the meantime, I'll make sure we have all the documentation to back you up. If it comes to a legal battle, we're in a strong position." I nodded, trying to take in everything she was saying. I didn't want to sound weak, but the truth was I was scared. Scared of what would happen if Greg found out. Scared of what might happen if this turned into something bigger than I was prepared for. But I couldn't back down now. I had to stand my ground. I couldn't let him take this from me. "So, what's the next step?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "We'll start by drafting a letter to Greg," Laura said. "Something formal, a reminder of his position here and the fact that this house is legally yours. It's not a confrontation, but a clear message that he doesn't have any say over your property. If he continues to press you for rent, we'll escalate from there." I felt a little better, but not much. There was still the feeling that I was walking on a tightrope, one small misstep from falling off into something I couldn't control. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a plan, something concrete to hold on to. I stood up to leave, feeling a mix of relief and tension. As I walked out of Laura's office, I felt like I had the strength to face Greg, to face whatever was coming next. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. Greg wasn't the type to back down, and now I had to play my hand carefully or everything could crumble around me. But no matter what, I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. The days that followed Laura's visit felt like a slow burn. There was a nervous anticipation in me, a quiet energy that buzzed under the surface. I kept thinking about the letter she suggested I send to Greg, about how it could be the key to everything, the one piece of paper that could finally put an end to all the tension. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I had a gut feeling that Greg wouldn't just back down when he saw a letter from a lawyer. He wasn't the type. He wasn't someone who would be easily intimidated, not after everything that had happened between us. I couldn't shake the feeling that sending that letter would only make things worse. I spent the next few days trying to figure out what to do. Greg had barely spoken to me since the argument, but I could tell he was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. He had this way of pretending everything was normal, like there was nothing between us, but I could see through it. He was itching for a fight, and I was ready for it. Then one evening it happened. I had just gotten home from work and was about to grab a quick dinner when I heard a loud bang at the door. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. I knew who it was before I even opened it. When I did, Greg was standing there, his face red with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, thrusting a piece of paper at me. It was the letter from Laura. He must have found it somehow, maybe while I was at work, or maybe he'd been snooping through my things. I didn't know. But there he was, holding the letter, his face twisted in fury. I didn't take the letter from him immediately. I just stood there, feeling the weight of his anger pressing down on me, like the walls were closing in. He shoved the paper into my hands, and I finally glanced down at it. It was just a formal letter, laying out the fact that I owned the house and reminding him of his legal position. Nothing special, nothing that should have made him so angry. But Greg wasn't seeing it that way. "You think you can just throw this at me and expect me to back down?" he yelled, his voice rising. "You think this gives you the upper hand? You don't know who you're messing with." "Greg," I said, my voice quieter than I intended, "this is my house. You don't get to demand money from me." I'm done letting you control this. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw something cold behind them. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something darker. You think I don't know what you're doing? You think I don't know about the trust, about the deed? He hissed, stepping closer to me. My stomach dropped. He knew. Somehow he knew. I took a step back, my mind racing as I tried to process the words he had just said. How did he know? I had kept everything to myself, hadn't shared a single thing with anyone, not even Laura. No one except for me and my mom had known about the trust. But now, Greg was standing there, his voice full of contempt, as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. You really thought you could pull one over on me, huh? Greg continued, his voice lower now, a dangerous calm settling over him. You thought I wouldn't find out? I've been watching you. I've been waiting for you to slip up. And now, you have. Greg, I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was trying to protect myself or buy time, but the words came out before I could stop them. He laughed, a bitter, harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about. You think I'm just some dumb guy who doesn't know what's going on? I knew from the beginning you had something I wanted. And now, I'm taking it. I couldn't breathe. It was like the room had closed in around me, the weight of his words suffocating. I had been so careful, so meticulous, trying to keep my plans hidden. But now, here he was, standing in front of me with the knowledge of everything I had fought to protect. He was taking control of the situation, and I was powerless to stop him. Or so I thought. Without thinking, I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. You're not taking anything from me, Greg, I said, my voice steady, though my insides were churning. You're not in control here. This house is mine, and there's nothing you can do to change that. If you want to fight this, fine, but I'm not backing down. Greg stared at me, his expression unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was furious or impressed, but either way, he wasn't going to back down. The silence between us stretched on for what felt like forever, each of us waiting for the other to make the first move. But finally, Greg spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. You don't get it, do you? You think you can just stand there and act like you have all